Hello, everyone. This is Creating the Future's board meeting for the month of May 2014, and we are now live.
Thank you, Dimitri. This is such a thrill for us to be back together again with all of the people watching, but in particular, as we've just been discussing, we have board members on various forms of transportation and everything from foot to train to car, and so we're very, very pleased to have found a way to be together, even though we're all in very different places right now. So welcome. We are so happy that you are here to help us create a world where people live well individually and collectively. That's the vision of Creating the Future. And if you're watching via our blog, then we hope that you will participate with us today using Twitter. The hashtag is CTFuture, and we welcome your comments, your questions, your insights into what's happening today. We still have a couple of board members yet to arrive to the meeting because of various things, so people will be joining us at some points along the way. And we are today pursuing a conversation about what it means to give financial oversight to this organization for our board. So it's undoubtedly going to be 2 hours of very interesting and lively conversation. And let's begin, if it's okay with everybody to start. Let's begin with a round of introductions of who is at our virtual table. And everybody who is walking, driving, etc., speak as loud as you can so people can hear you. And whoever wants to start, please go ahead.
How about you start?
All right, I'll start. My name is Gail Valeriot, and I am from Guelph, Ontario, Canada, and doing consulting work here in Guelph, and also working with this board since 2011, and currently the board chair.
Okay. I'm Hilda Gottlieb with Creating the Future, co-founder, and as Gail has dubbed me, Chief Boundary Pusher.
And Dimitri Petropoulos with Creating the Future, co-founder, and Chief Everything Else.
I'm Alex Budak in Stockholm, Sweden. Outside of my job, my role as a board member, I'm running an incubator for Swedish social entrepreneurs here.
Justin or Alexander?
This is Justin. Yes, this is Justin Pollock. I'm in Washington, D.C. I have my own consulting practice working with community benefit organizations in planning and leadership. And my role is to push the Chief Boundary Pusher's boundaries.
And you do. And you do. Man, oh man. Alexandra bumped off. Her phone call bumped off. She has been participating. She's been listening via cell phone. I see Rebecca is just joining us, thank goodness. Carl is running late. And Rebecca, you may have come on muted, so make sure that you're not muted. And whenever you're unmuted, you're just in time to say, hello, I'm Rebecca Hurd.
Hello, Rebecca Hurd, board documentarian, tuning in from Idaho.
Hi, Rebecca. Nice to see you.
Somebody has it on in YouTube. Somebody's got this on in the blog post, so you're going to need to click off the blog post.
Or mute it.
Or mute it, because we'll hear.
Someone's living about 10 seconds in the past.
Yeah.
So you can like go back in time and fix it. Oops, I didn't mean to say that.
Steal all of who wins the World Series.
Yes, I know. There was a quote I saw this weekend that said, it's the reason why faith healers don't hang around hospitals and psychics don't win the lottery.
Is what? Back to the Future?
Yes, they're not real.
So, folks, every month we start our meeting by sharing together what has been particularly spectacular in the last little while. What is it that's been inspiring us about the work of Creating the Future? What have we been involved in, or what have we seen about Creating the Future that has made being part of this board and this organization so essential? So why don't we start a round of awesomeness so that we can be inspired by each other. everybody. Go.
All right, I'll start with an awesome, which is something I'm working on now and is something that's coming up in the near future. Here in Sweden, there's this amazing week called Almedalen, which is where a bunch of people gather on this island in the south of Sweden. And it's basically every single political party and every major NGO, nonprofit organization, all gathers for this amazing week where we spend time in networking and mingling and panels, basically bringing everyone together who has some role in kind of shaping the future of what Sweden will look like. So this will be my first time going, and through my role, I get to organize a whole bunch of events. And while, of course, I run the Swedish Incubator, a big part of my job is to get a country of Sweden that isn't really known for thinking of themselves as kind of change makers, often instead relying on the government, to get a bunch of people here that are kind of interested in change and get them thinking themselves, feel empowered to actually be change makers. So a bunch of stuff is going on for that week, which should be a really memorable and exciting and beautiful week.
So what does it look like, Alex? I mean, is it like in a room? Is it in a space? Is it in a community? I mean, like how many people? This is so fascinating.
Yeah, it's thousands, and it's basically like a kind of more like a village, I would say. It's incredibly hard to find accommodations. So there's so many people that want to go and not enough space. So we're sleeping like 6 to a small apartment to give you a sense of like how many people come on this small island. And then there's everywhere from like big formal events where people will wear suits to very informal mingles and picnics and kind of non-conferencey events as well. So it's a whole spectrum of things. Each group has subgroups, and more social change focused ones and some more political ones. But the great part about it is that there's no not like South by Southwest where you have to buy tickets. Everything is free. So you go to whatever it is you want to attend.
And what's it called again, Alex?
It's called Almedalen Week. Almedalsvecka.
If there's a link or something, could you send that along?
Yeah, I'll find it and I'll put it in the chat now.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Wow.
So hi to Maria Turnbull, who is watch more often. So welcome and thank you for being here.
We do too.
And by all means, chime in. If you've got an awesome, let us know what your awesome is. So that would be pretty fun. I'll say my awesome, I guess, since I mentioned the word. Now I'm stuck and I have to say it. 2 awesomes. One, I can't help but talk about the panel conference, the joint conference in Pennsylvania between the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations, PANO, and Creating the Future. It was remarkable. I don't want to take away too much from other awesomes that may be related to it, but I just was amazed at the effect and the impact of creating something around a framework that was intended for an outcome beyond filling seats. So that was pretty amazing. And I'm sure it'll come up some more as we talk about things today. And hi, Carl.
Carl is here.
Yay.
Hi, Carl.
And my second quick awesome is for the last, God, I think it might be like 10 years, I have been putting together a annual Mother's Day picture for taking the kids, as in my boys and Lizzie, and putting them in bizarro or weird situations or whatnot, and that becomes a Mother's Day present to the moms.
And they all send photos from wherever they are on the planet.
They either send like individual photos or they send group shots. I try to get them together beforehand to do. I don't do it, but if they are together, so that they'll take a picture. So yesterday's picture was they were at visiting the Endeavour space shuttle I think it's in Long Beach, and they were in there. So they took some pictures while they were in there. So I kind of created a collage of them on every TV screen, sort of like the stadium cam at the football game, where the camera points to somebody and they're on every single image. So it was kind of fun, and that's sort of awesome to be able to continue that tradition and seeing them grow up in these pictures to now they're adults doing this.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Carl, you are here.
Hi, Carl.
Good evening, everybody, or good morning, I should say, for most of you. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can indeed.
Sorry, I don't seem to have joined you for some time. Various circumstances have conspired against me, is all I can say. I'm sorry I'm late. Public transport, and then I happened to coincide with arriving back near home to the most torrential downpour that you could possibly imagine, and I've just had to motorbike through in my suit in all this sort of downpouring rain, so I've just had to change quickly. A bit like one of those newsreaders. If you saw my bottom half, you'd be alarmed.
Well,
Is that just now? Or is this a general statement, or is this
just now?
Yeah, Carl, I don't know where to go with that.
Seems to me we used to tease Mark Riffey about that. He would threaten to show up with at meetings with his pajama pants on or something.
Yeah, I just have this horrendous thought of a pull quote from this meeting being, "If you saw my bottom half, you'd be alarmed."
Yes. Well, I'm in Mark Riffey mode.
He's on an airplane right now, so you're going to have to be him.
I presume I've joined just as you're talking about awesomes.
Yes.
Well, in some respects, my awesome is that I'm sort of still standing after what has been the most horrendously sort of busy period at work, when we've had all sorts of things to do in terms of publishing new books, launching manifestos, and so on. But probably the one that's sort of most firmly in my mind at the moment is that I've just been to Perth in Western Australia, where I was talking about some of the stuff that we do in the UK and talking about some of our recent experience. And it sort of never ceases to amaze me how much you get from sort of going to new places, talking about what you do, hearing about what other people do all the time. You learn so much when you go and experience different cultures and different people. And they're going through a bit of a tough time there, or rather they're about to go through a bit of a tough time, and they were trying to learn a bit from us. And my closing point was that was sort of inspired by you guys, is the old sort of Abraham Lincoln quote that anyone can predict their future, but actually the best way to make your future is to create it. And if you want to see the video, it's there on video.
How fun.
Wow.
How wonderful. Well, we have missed you.
So that's 400 people in Australia that have been told to create the future.
I like it. I like it. Well, I am personally, I can't speak for all of us, but I am personally really glad to miss you.
I'm glad to be back, actually.
And you're sitting in a new room.
No, it's the same old room, but my Mac is currently feeling sick and is in repair. So this is my work laptop, which is at a much lower level than normal.
Understood.
I'm rather missing my Mac.
Well, whatever it is, it's working, and that's great.
Yep.
Beautiful. I wanted to, before we move on to the next awesome, tell you Maria Turnbull's awesome.
Good.
Yeah, she went ahead. Her awesome is spring renewal in nature. Bowen is beautiful right now, and she lives on Bowen Island.
Outside of Vancouver.
Outside Vancouver. And in work, seeing impactful work in our executive lab.
How cool. How cool. Well, it is wonderful to have you with us, Maria. So hi. I'm going to go next. And sort of riff off of what Dimitri said in terms of the ongoing impact that is still unfolding from the panel conference. So many various pieces all being pulled together. The team at Pano is still crunching the evaluations, and even the evaluations were different. We didn't ask the normal, did the speaker seem knowledgeable, and et cetera. We asked very specifically about the speakers, the session accomplishing the outcome that we wanted, and reflecting what stood out. One of the things that's standing out for me is watching one of the speakers in particular, Susan Detweiler, who, and if you're watching, hello, who really took all of the materials that we prepared for the speakers and put it into practice in all the rest of the stuff that she's doing. And she's just been sharing over and over again how it is impacting her work, which is just really exciting to see the ripples in something that we had intended to be helping speakers prepare for the conference, that those speakers are now using those materials out in their regular world and also seeing enhanced results in that. So it's just all been sort of very exciting watching the ripples happen, which is what we wanted in a demonstration project, to learn and explore how does it work, what does it actually look like in practice when you take something that we know has worked one at a time and you try to extend it to a larger forum to see if you can affect more change, because that's what we're about. So that was very, very cool.
I want to add a quick caveat to that. We were also able to, and most of the people here either were there or know this, but we were able to do live broadcasts of the plenaries using this technology, using the live hangout. So both days' plenaries were broadcast from the conference, which is actually very cool to be able to engage people on that real-time level.
Yeah, and so that I'm going to do that as my Creating the Future awesome. My personal awesome is that I am preparing. I'm spending this month getting everything done that needs to get done, including hiring our operations coordinator, which will hopefully happen in the next 2 weeks. We're at the point of final interviews. I think we've got 5 people that we are considering for potentially interviewing and pulling out of that. So that's exciting. Like beyond belief exciting. But I am preparing June 1 to go on sabbatical and write and create classes for 3 months. And writing the workbook on the continuum of potential and creating classes for Creating the Future, and I am going to spend 3 months writing, going to movies, and working out. Not bad.
That sounds amazing.
I know, I'm very, very excited. And I will do so in Tucson, Arizona, where it will be somewhere between 100 and 112 Fahrenheit.
Of course, right now it's 75 degrees, so...
Yeah, it's cool out now, but yeah, so that's my awesome, as I'm preparing for even more awesome.
Cool. I'll jump in. So I shared this in an email out to board members, but my awesome involves our board chair, Gail, and Gail and I had an opportunity. Not only were we at the panel conference, but we followed up last Friday for what seemed like a 2-minute conversation that lasted 2 hours and probably could have kept going, where to honor my tongue-in-cheek about pushing the boundary pusher, we had a conversation that was a culmination of really thinking about where we, so I'm using the we collective, so I'll share from my standpoint, where I've stumbled, where I've been challenged, where I've seen success, where I feel like I need support, what all of this means to me, how it connects to my work that I'm doing, kind of all of these questions, and how, when I say this, I'm talking to much of what Creating the Future is focused on. And for that conversation to go where it went, and for us to be thinking about this organization, the role that we play in it, how to strengthen the network, and really I felt like we were having an offline conversation, online, about what it would really take to make that 10-year mission a possibility, and it just unlocked idea after idea after idea, and I think fundamentally what was the most powerful thing to me was it actually forced me, and I think Gail too, into a path of walking the talk of changing the future's values and approach and process, that was pushing our limits about how we were thinking about what we were doing as Creating the Future fellows. So It was awesome.
Wow.
So can I change my awesome to my awesome is Justin's awesome?
It was quite awesome, really. And the notes, now I look back at them and I have orange highlights all over the place, and building community is the highest potential. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. And the good news is that we're going to keep having those kind of conversations both all together and individually and all over the place. So this is just the beginning.
I want to hear Rebecca's. Rebecca's is always
Rebecca's is the last we need to hear.
Well, I was thrilled to be streaming the 2 piano sessions, and I was like floating in my chair in Idaho because I was so excited for everyone that you were all together, and just what's going on in that state, and will also happen in Idaho. So I feel it and know that there are just sparks of all of it as I beat the hell out of my drum. And I did have the CEO of one of the organizations I'm working with. We now have a new contract in the works, and it's all around everything I've been doing with their staff, which is the aiming for what's possible. We have the Pollyanna principles hanging up in my scribble in the cafeteria, little employee eating area. And as part of, she's having all new staff members come in on board, and they're all having a what's possible session with me, and she just is kind of leading and this is a united way of a whole region. So she has asked me, she wants to, I guess, she's the one who said a couple months ago, I mentioned thought partner. Well, I'm her thought partner, and she said, she did this whole nice story about how I'm kind of like a butterfly and can just land quietly in a situation and really absorb native intelligence instantly, but people feel comfortable with me enough that she watches that they're willing to feel uncomfortable with me, which really was powerful, because I am kind of, and it's all creating the future, but when you feel it in your DNA, the prep work is so liberating. I'm no longer afraid of anything. Every conversation, I'm all amped up, because I always was planning for the worst thing, and I just don't even in my head have to reprogram. I don't go there ever, and it's just so joyful, and I'm so grateful, and I thank you all and I'm delighted about Gail and your leadership role. So I'm just oozing with awesome about creating the future. Thank you. And my personal awesome is I'm running a marathon on Saturday. So.
Oh, wow. Is this like
it's the journey. I mean, every single day I do gratitude runs. It's just all full of gratitude, and I'm always thinking about creating the future when I'm running and the people in my life, and whatever the heck happens on Saturday, I'll be in tears of joy, just like I pretty much start to cry every day because I'm really so joyful.
So is this a full marathon, Rebecca?
It's the full deal, and I haven't done a full one since my 20s, but I'm actually, I believe, going to be an hour faster than 15 years ago. So.
Wow.
And I've been running in hail and snowstorms for 4 months in McCall at a higher altitude, so I'm just happy that day.
Wow. Wow. And I presume behind you, Rebecca, is one of the bibs that you've worn in other marathons, right?
The only other full one I ever did was that one in Manhattan in 2000, so my mother framed that for me, and I'll have another companion one. Here I am at 43, running the Great Potato in Idaho. And they do give you this humongous spud at the end with all like the fixins bar and everything.
Oh, how funny.
At about mile 18, that's going to sound so good to you.
I'm going to be in an altered state by that point, and my husband and family are going to be there with cowbells, and it's just
Wow. So cool. So absolutely cool. Rebecca, you're blowing me away, and I'm absolutely certain that you're blowing Justin away, because what you just said is almost identical to what we were talking about for all that time, that so much of what we're all about is actually the process and not the outcome. And helping each other to get comfortable with that is so much a part of what we're all about. and that, you know, yes, it's actually fundamental to feel that level of discomfort when things are changing. And what does that mean for us in how we create new worlds? Whew. So I guess I'm last, and I guess the professional awesome, I was going to say meeting with Justin and spending time with the fellows in at the panel conference. All of that is definitely what I would suggest are really awesome things that have happened. And watching the last session, you know, when you go to a conference and everybody can't wait to get out the door, you know, they start around noon on the last day thinking, you know, how much time has to go by before I can reasonably sneak out of here and get on to the next thing? At this conference, people stayed actively engaged. I'd say probably half of the participants, and there were about 200 people there, stayed until the very beginning of the last session, and at 3 o'clock, and stayed all the way till 5 o'clock, deeply engaged in a discussion about what they were going to do as a result of everything that they had been a part of for the past day and a half. I've never seen anything like that in all the conferences I've ever been to, where people were actually more engaged by the end when they wanted to go home than they were during the doing. So that was so inspirational to me. I cannot wait to see what happens when people take the actions that they plan both individually and in their organizations, and most incredibly in their whole communities, to the next level. And it will inevitably happen. The folks at PANO will be working diligently, especially under the leadership and guidance of Michael Coomer and Drew Goldstein and Marilyn Jenkins. There's no question that all of the board are passionately excited about what happens next, and I think we can all sit back and watch in awe what they're going to be doing, and as partners to creating the future. So Hildy and Dimitri, I think you need great praise and kudos for all the hard work that you put into ensuring that partnership was on track, that it was working, and that the conference turned out to be so effortlessly elegant, along with the hard work of the panel staff, who were absolutely extraordinary. A really wonderful team.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, Gail, that we did a lot of work remotely, and we did work when we were there, but the real groundwork and the real, the making it happen was really that the people at PANO. So I want to make sure that's that they're acknowledged for that, because they brought the people to the table. We may have had some really tasty treats, at the table, but they were the ones that did that, and they are the ones that ran, helped it run seamlessly, right down to the fact that they had violets on the registration table, just because it created a different atmosphere.
Yep. And in keeping with what we're saying about the process being so important, every discussion, every workshop included an opportunity for people to talk with each other about why they were there, who they were, what they brought to the conference, how they got there, what was their past and experience. And in almost every case, people didn't want to stop. They made so many deep connections, or deeper connections than they would at a traditional conference, that you could see that right away. The conversation over lunchtime, the conversation over breaks was very engaged, and that, I think, made that conference stand out as something unique around the nonprofit world.
Well, one of the things, and I just want to add this, is that the intent was, we've seen so much rebellion against conferences. And creating the future is so consciously about creating what's possible rather than reacting to what's wrong. And so frequently we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We say, well, conferences are no longer working. We'll do a, quote, unconference. But the intent of this conference has always been an educational conference, because that's so deeply at the root of what PANO is. So the question wasn't, how do you throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say, well, conferences don't work, people don't get to know each other. The question became, if the important part is building relationships and building on the strengths of the people in the room, then how do you embed that into an educational conference? And so that's why it was so important that all presenters have a framework for their presentation that included getting to know each other. The fun part to watch from the outside, again, looking at what does this accomplish for creating the future moving forward, because it is a demonstration, was the we keep talking about our external demonstration projects as taking what we know works in the small scale and sort of writting it large. And what we saw with 200 people over the course of a day and a half, and I loved the way you put it, Gail, that people were actually more engaged at the end of the conference than all. What we saw was the energy increased and increased and increased and increased. And one of the things that we teach in the immersion course is when we start with what's possible, the energy gains as people have the conversation. When we start with what's wrong, the energy depletes and we get more scared because we spiral down. And that what we watched over that day and a half was the energy in the room just literally just, it became buoyant. And by the end, as Gail said, groups formed. The intriguing thing is that we formed groups based on, do you want to take this into your community and lead the charge in your community? Do you want to take this into your organization, what you experienced into your organization, lead the charge in your organization? Do you want to sort of lead the charge in your own life? We assumed that the organizational group would be the huge one and that maybe 4 or 5 people would say, I want to lead the charge in my community. Probably 20 to 30 people said, I want to lead the charge in my community, which was remarkable. And possibly half of those were business people, many of them exhibitors. So again, I could go on and on and on and on about what we experienced and saw as the results just visually from the conference, but at every point it did things that conferences don't normally do, so it was pretty cool. And I'll stop now because otherwise I'll just keep going on about it.
Okay. So we've heard from everyone. No more tweets, Dimitri, that we.
Other than the fact that Maria thinks that Hildy's sabbatical sounds way cool.
Absolutely. Anything that involves movies has to be.
Yes.
So, folks, one of the things that was shared at that conference that I think is worth having a quick reference or a quick reminder of is the description, a beautifully written description of Creating the Future's theory of change. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I do want to read a little tiny bit because I think it really sets the tone for our meeting. Creating a world where people are living well individually and collectively is not a matter of the next innovative action. It's a matter of rethinking the assumptions that go into our actions. If we want a world that celebrates the power and collective resource that we as a planet all share, a world where we bring out the best in each other and aim for what's possible, those assumptions can be built into our actions. So, on that beautiful note, excuse me, of uncovering what our assumptions are, I thought that was a lovely way of helping us to begin today. We have a couple of little tiny business pieces before we move into our conversation, but I want you to already be starting to think about how are we uncovering assumptions as we make our way down this agenda. So today, maybe I can ask you to quickly give me some permission to move on from our consent agenda, one item in that agenda, which is the minutes of our last board meeting.
Carl, did you need something?
Gail, you just triggered a thought in my mind, as you always do. I came across something recently that said all this stuff about theory of change, it's nonsense. Because theories is something that we've tested and tested and tested over and over and again. What we actually have are hypotheses of change. So just this idea that we're a living laboratory, I just thought fits in very well with this idea that it's not a theory of change, it's a hypothesis of change. It's what we think might happen, and we're testing whether or not that's going to happen. So that's my meaningful contribution of the day.
And it's beautiful, and we need to check in with each other on a regular basis to reflect on whether our hypothesis is where we're at.
Sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. Thank
I
you for
love it,
sharing
Carl. I think that's powerful. That it's a new way of framing it. That when we're talking with people, we can unleash their thinking.
that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's get through this. The first parts. First of all, thank you to Deborah Beck for amazing minutes from the April meeting. And is there a motion to approve those minutes within the consent agenda? That was you, Dimitri?
Yeah.
Seconded.
And Justin? Or is there any objection to those minutes? Nope, seeing none. We're good. Today's agenda is going to focus entirely on the continuing conversation about financial oversight, and we're going to ask that we observe the thought framework that we typically use in considering our the issues that come before us as a board, as well as the reverse engineering framework, by starting with what is the best possible outcome, the highest potential, and what is important about the conversations that we're having and for whom, so that we can really get our heads around the outcomes the impact and outcomes that we're looking for, and being together with each other through that process to create the outcomes that we want. So, the question for today that we're going to be tackling is about helping each other to unpack the words financial and oversight, so that we can get to some practical examples of what this board will be doing in terms of holding itself accountable for not only the resources that this organization needs to meet its mission, but to ensure that we're examining what it means to work in partnership with our communities. Does that seem like an okay place to start? Any questions about the agenda before we go further?
No, not at all, Gail. I do want to very quickly add that Alexandra was not able to stay connected, and she's very disappointed. She was also having problems with being able to hear the meeting as she was on a speakerphone. So she will probably not be joining us for the rest of the meeting, but I wanted to at least let you know that it was with great sadness that she says that. So. Or disappointment, I should say.
Right, and she's still in transit somewhere. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Planes, trains, and automobiles.
Yep. She's the automobile of the equation. Okay. So last time when we were having this conversation, we wrapped up basically at the point where we said to each other, we want to deconstruct the notion of financial and the notion of oversight. And we felt that if we could get our heads really around what that meant for us as a board, that this was the time to do that before the operations of Creating the Future and the board itself were ramped up to the point where there were extraordinary times we would have to create to get to that place. So we had outlined a series of questions that we would consider for this month, and these come right out of the conversation last month. So I have not, and no one has concocted these out of thin air. These are your questions. I wonder whether or not it might be a good idea to start with the question that Justin posed for us at the end of the last meeting, which was asking us to think about times or experiences that we've had on other boards and other leadership roles as it relates to oversight, and what we would have wanted to be different within that oversight role, what we might have wanted in that situation or needed in that situation in order to offer the oversight that we're thinking about.
Gail, I have just one point that I'm recalling from the last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly where it was, and I didn't scribble it down, but there was at one point where somebody said, because we kept going down the rabbit hole of this, can we just make the assumption that we're not talking about finances, but talking about all resources and move on from there?
Yep.
I remember hearing that, and
yeah, that was the premise of the conversation.
So as we're unpacking quote financial and quote oversight, I'd sort of like to strike financial from the conversation period and reframe this as oversight and or whatever else we decide over as stewards of all of our resources, because that struck me the last time is again somebody saying, can we just assume that and move on?
Right. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Hildy, because it probably bears saying that the minutes captured the conversation that we were having, I think, quite well, insofar as we quickly went to, this is bigger than just money, and that these are resources that we understand to be owned by the community. However we define community, they are not our resources, they are not the organization's resources. And that seemed to guide us into a discussion. That's when we said we need to unpack these two concepts and really get clear on what we want this board's role to be as it relates to resources and stewardship.
Okay. So could you share again the question? I'm sorry.
I want to be sure that this is the right question to be asking at this moment. It seems to me that reflecting on the things that we believe have been important in the past related to resource oversight, and what we know we would have needed to be successful then, can guide us in terms of knowing, because of course the nub of this issue is, what is this board's role? That will lead us to the places of practicality. But for now, it's a high potential question that I think it bears some consideration.
So then what is
the question is,
what is the potential of what is the potential of the board's role? What does it make possible? What is
Yep. And what do your past experiences related to oversight tell you that highest potential might be?
Okay.
What have we learned in other times and places that would give us some guidance about what would really assist this board to be the steward, not only the stewards, but the ambassadors, building relationships, building connections, understanding what those resources are, etc.
So this speaks really to, and I know I'm going the rabbit hole approach, but bear with me here. I feel like whenever finances come up, it's incredibly reactive. And just even the terminology, financial oversight. You're reacting to data. And for that purpose, in answering my own question, I have not actually seen it from the oversight space ever work in a positive way. It has always been reactive, and always allows a giant opening for people to go to the negative and what's wrong. And so I actually started to rethink this from the standpoint of an operational, which was the only time finances started making sense to me was when they followed my programmatic work, when I had to build a financial model to support what I wanted to do, or I think in more of what we're talking about, when I had to start to assess the resources that I needed to engage in order to make what I wanted to do possible. And so this is where it's all coming to. There's something about this that I feel like we have to figure out the process where the financials follow another conversation that has, it's the context. So the higher potential is creating the context of a conversation that drives.
Oh.
He'll be back.
Yeah.
I want to pick up off of that because it's.
Sorry. Okay, I'm back.
Okay, good.
As I was just about to say what I was going to say.
I know, and the answer is.
Tune in next week.
Yes, exactly. That's the true cliffhanger. I keep getting bumped off. So now I have to reconstitute my thoughts.
You were just about to say creating the context.
Yeah, so it took me to the wellness. This is about organizational wellness. It's about the stewardship of what we have to make what we are trying to do possible. And so without, and so the line that I'm dancing on right here, because I want to really honor this space, we have to have some of the big idea as part of this conversation, which is what are we trying to make possible by doing this? And then we have to figure out how to steer it to what is it that we need to know about how we're utilizing our resources to help us understand that.
Justin, I wish you could see the notes that are sitting in front of me. I am so smiling in terms of our thinking. I spent about an hour this morning, my brain sort of exploding as yours has been, and again, we had talked when we talked about the bylaws about our codifying a process, a thought process. And that every time we have these conversations that have to do with the board's role, which is what you'd want in your bylaws, to think in terms of process, what occurred to me was exactly what you said, is that when we do planning, when we teach planning at Creating the Future, we don't teach how do you fundraise and then look up. We start with what do we want to accomplish, what will it take to accomplish that. What it will take to accomplish that is to identify all the resources that are needed, which in financial terms is called budgeting, but when you're looking at all resources, you're asking the question, okay, so here's what we want to accomplish that the board should be talking about. What will that take? Well, it will take all of these resources, and we've already talked about earlier, I think in the fall, about budgeting for all of our resources. Identifying then, okay, where do those resources currently exist, some internally, some externally, and then creating a plan for engaging those resources, and then monitoring that plan to see, are we engaging and nurturing those resources and shepherding and stewarding those resources in a way that the act of engaging the resources actually builds community, and that the board's role as leaders of this organization is from start to finish. And one of the thoughts that had simultaneously occurred to me, and I've been actually penning a blog post about this, is if we reframe the word board, if we believe in the governance as leadership sort of concept, if we reframe the board as the leadership team, what does that what would a leadership team do in terms of identifying what we want to accomplish, identifying what it will take in terms of all resources, identifying those resources, creating the plan to engage those resources, nurturing them, and then, quote, overseeing that whole thing. So I'm very much feeling what you're talking about.
You know, I am going to riff off the word oversight, Justin, versus monitoring. And that oversight has a hierarchical connotation that, well, I'm over this, therefore I know best. And there's a different kind of stewardship connotation to monitoring than there is to oversight. And I agree with you that it is built into it to go down a rabbit hole at everything. It is the, you know, which fax machine is least expensive, and why are you spending money on a gross of paper clips, as opposed to what are you trying to accomplish. So I just want to reiterate that I agree with you that the just the words themselves create an invitation to go small.
Carl.
I'd build on that actually, Dimitri, and say that they problematize the words money. They make it sound like something that I mean, it's almost suggesting that the people who are stewarding the money on a day-to-day basis are not to be trusted. When actually, what if I understand what we're trying to do here, stewardship in this case is about thinking about how do we husband those resources most effectively to achieve the biggest potential, not how do we stop you from spending them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Sorry, I muted. I think there's one underlying thing here, which maybe is important to just bring to the surface, which is the role of narrative in all of this. So, for instance, when we saw your budget, I saw that you have $30 in your PayPal account, that you spent $120 on technology. None of that really matters to me in and of itself, how much is in each thing. It's really about the narrative that you construct around it. And so maybe that's the shift from being in the oversight, which is where you just see numbers and roll, no, that seems like too much, or that seems like too little. But whereas narrative is what brings people into the process, and therefore I have context to understand. I understand what the point of this is.
It's the why.
Alex, I laugh because one of the courses I teach on budgeting, I talk about the footnotes, and I say, shouldn't those footnotes actually be the top? Shouldn't the actual spreadsheet of the budget be the footnote? The narrative about what this, like all the context is what should come first, and that makes me think, so rather than being reactive, what's the question as leaders we would be asking to which the response would be, there's something about the money I want to know?
Tell me more, Justin.
Well, so I'm thinking about, again, we lead with the financials, and I think to what Carl was saying, which points you, and even what Alex was saying, is like, here are the buckets that it's in, here's how it's being spent, is that okay? And we condition it to being, it's not like, and it's even the oversight, it's not like I walk into a board meeting saying, I want to see the financials because. I only ask that, I only see the financials because it's my oversight role. And so I'm trying to think of, if I were to if I'm in a conversation, if I'm thinking about what my responsibility is, what's the question I'm trying to answer, or what's the conversation I would be in which I would be turning to the financials to help me understand it, to help me to answer a question.
Are we going to make it through till the end of the year? That's a situation I've been in before as a board member.
Do we have what we need to accomplish what we need to accomplish?
I've come across more mundane versions of that, LD.
Oh, I know.
Can we?
I know. Will we live through next week? Yeah, I know.
Can we make payroll?
Yeah, literally.
I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of better questions than that.
Well, those are the questions. Those are the questions we don't want. So
Right.
The question is, what's the question that we sort of want to preempt? We don't want to get to that point.
I just keep coming back to, and I really shy away from the financial aspect, but the fact that money is one of a bazillion resources, and it is the most scarce of the resources. And I contend that money is actually not a resource; it's a thing that gets you the things you want. And so I keep coming back to. What will it take? What resources will it take for us to accomplish what we have set out to accomplish? And how do we want to monitor to ensure that we are nurturing those resources, that we are, as Carl said, husbanding, stewarding those resources? What will it take? And how do we nurture those resources and honor them? There's a really big walking the talk piece in here for me.
Mm-hmm. I think it takes some rethinking. And I don't mean that we haven't rethought it, but sort of personal rethinking when looking at resources. And you just said something, Hildy, about it is it's not something in and of itself. It's a means to get what you want. And the thought that went through my mind, well, unless you use like bricks of money to build a house, a very ineffective way to use the money, but then it would actually be doing something, which is providing you shelter. But that's because it's the paper that's providing you shelter, not the arbitrary value that we assign to it. So I'm just sort of thinking about resources and trying to have the broadest possible mindset for what is a resource and how do we husband those resources. And I like that word, Carl, because I think it implies a kind of relationship with the resource that is so far removed from oversight.
I was accused once of being sexist for using the word husbanded. I suggested to the accuser that they didn't understand what it meant.
Yeah, because we don't talk about animal wifery.
Or basic biology. So, folks, what I'm hearing in this discussion is a desire for us to move as far as we can up the chain away from the basic reactive fiduciary responsibility, partly by prodding ourselves to wonder what questions we could be asking, which leads me to thinking about, because this is the second conversation we've been having about this topic, and I know us well enough to know that we love to talk about these things. I want to ask you to ponder what would a process, depending on what continent and country you live in, you would see this board actually engaging in that would allow it to consider itself quite successful in however you define it, husbanding or overseeing or encouraging or stewarding. What does that process look like for us? How will we know? No. Just what would it look like?
Yeah, I was just jotting down some things, Gail, as you were talking. And I can't define what the process would look like, but it would be a process that includes the board determining what its role is in setting our goals, identifying the resources needed for those goals, identifying where those resources currently exist, and creating a plan for engaging those resources. And so what would the board's role be in setting the goals? What would the board's role be in identifying the resources that are needed, formerly known as budgeting? What would the board's role be in identifying where those resources that we need actually already exist? And what would the board's role be in creating a plan for and executing and acting upon a plan for engaging those resources? And then what would the board's role be in monitoring the use and the husbanding of those resources?
Yep.
And the whole process overall.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say sort of yes to all of those. Sticking with this sort of analogy of husbandry, for me what goes hand in hand with that is sustainability. So if we're thinking about what our role is, we have some resources that this organisation uses, and the most obvious ones that spring to mind to me are Dimitri and Hildy, and now Gail, you as chair, and our role is about making sure that your contribution is sustainable, that you don't burn out in the next year or the next 18 months, that we use or we engage you in such a way that you're here for the long term. And that will also apply to other relationships that we have and resources that we connect with. We engage those people and we ask of them in a way that is sustainable, so that they don't think that we're just coming to them, taking what we need and doing our thing. The other bit about the sustainability piece for me is where I think you all know I've been critical of us in the past, is that sometimes we can be a bit, oh, well, we're going to change the world, and we're going to change the world by 2017, type stuff, and some of this for me is about actually, okay, well, can we try and put some bounds around what it is that we want to change in terms of sort of outside world, and can we start to be a bit more methodical about what resources are required for different scales of change?
Yeah, I think that comes back down to our not having a community impact plan.
Yep.
I think it keeps circling back down to our not having a plan.
So I want to.
And before you do that, Justin, which comes into what is the board's role in the establishing of the goals? And I think you're absolutely right, Carl. I think that's exactly where it is what will the board's role be, and the process by which the board will establish the goals through that planning. Go ahead, Justin. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. So this actually dovetails out of the conversation Gail and I were having, and when you talked about a leadership team, that's what we are. Fundamentally, that's what I believe. I don't care what you call us, board, staff. We are the leadership of the organization. So I think that, and I think to dovetail on some of the language that Carl's used, I'm now riffing off the science piece. I think we all have to deeply understand the hypothesis of change. What it is that we believe we can actually do to create change and the change we want to see. I think we all have a collective responsibility to develop that community impact plan with the boundaries and the scope that I think Carl is legitimately requesting. I'm going to jump here and say, assuming we have engaged actively as a leadership team to develop that hypothesis of change, to create that scope of work around the community benefit plan. All of that is in place. That is our hypothesis. I think with regard to what we're supposed to be talking about today, our conversation now is our experiment is underway. I think the conditions in terms of a process is A, revisiting, do we all remember what the hypothesis was? Yes, no, okay. Do we all remember the experiment design and what we had intended in terms of the things we needed to be doing to make this possible? Yes. Okay. How are we? A, the experience. What are the experiment results? What are we seeing actually happening right now in terms of progress towards that? How are we using the resources that we expected ourselves to use in doing that? And are those sustainable? Is that pattern that we have been following sustainable? What do we need to? And so it's actually making me think of those 5 planning questions, which are, what's success? Okay, success is our plan. What actions are we taking to do it? That's our experiment design. What are the risks? What is it that's when we're looking at how are we using those resources? Is that sustainable? Are there potential risks we see to that sustainability? What more do we need to do or learn about in order to change the direction, if necessary, to either amplify, to tone down, to redirect? And is there anything that we're missing? But I honestly feel like that's the conversation we need to have every time, because it keeps us tied. Revisiting the theory or our hypothesis of change shouldn't take very long. But then we can come in and say, and maybe it is that at a particular meeting we're saying, you know what, we want to focus in on this targeted area. We said we were going to do the panel conference. Let's just take that, okay? That was something that was presented. It was part of a strategy. Let's talk about how that developed, what we saw come out of that, what resources were involved in making that possible. Where does that leave us right now in terms of, I think, Carl's question of, did we burn you out? Did it use what we expected? What do we need to learn from that? And what adjustments do we need to make? To me, obviously it's my bias because I just laid it out, but that's all about the questions that lead us to what.
The king of the cliffhanger. This is just, and the murderer is.
I'm killing you here. That leads us to all the questions we want to answer with our knowledge about the resources and how they're utilized and engaged.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, can we use our resource budget to buy Justin a proper broadband connection? It's worth it.
What do we see as the board's role in creating the plan that will determine the goals and the programs and the projects that we work on?
I can't, I think back to, I do recall driving in the car when we had this conversation, and that moment when we realized that we really do need to be together in one place at one time to hammer out this plan, because we can't really finish our work. We can't really take the next steps in our work until we've got that done. I can't think of anybody who has a more vital role in making that determination than the board. So the board's role is really quite central to planning for community impact.
Because in my mind, all the rest of it is academic if we don't have a plan. All the rest of it is you're raising money for the sake of raising money, or to keep things alive, or to make payroll, or to all those reactive questions that until we have, we have a plan that I created. That doesn't mean we have a plan. That means that we have a plan that I created based on my hypothesis of change, rooted in my doing a community impact plan 3 years ago and my figuring it out. That doesn't mean we have a plan. That means we have Hildy. And so looking at our coming together around a plan, the rest of it is just, how do we do, because what we've been acting on in programs has been the plan that I put in place, which is, I think it's a great plan, and it seems to be engaging people, and it seems to be doing good things.
And it may be the plan that, great parts of it may be the plan that ends up being the plan.
It may,
or it may not.
And it may not, but what we're doing now is we're resourcing the pieces of the plan that we can accomplish until we have a plan. And so for me, the rest of it becomes, again, as Justin talked about, and you talked about, Alex, in terms of the narrative. We're looking for resources for pieces of the story, but until we have the whole story, I don't see.
Yep.
It feels out of context.
And Carl, you may say, "Wow, 2024, no problem." With that plan. I mean, as opposed to, we need to look at discrete chunks or whatever. I mean, it may be so apparent that the hypothesis is so possible, that the outcomes of the hypothesis are so possible if we have the plan.
But we haven't all created it together, and so what winds up happening is everybody's got their own view of what they think it means, and when that happens, the only thing that you can latch onto is the thing you understand, which is the resources, which is I see Hildy and Dimitri getting burned out, which is where's the money going to come from? Because it's the only thing that we can latch onto. Until I just see that as being the biggest question, is what is the board's role in not only the planning but making sure we have a plan.
I think
so. I certainly see the importance of the plan at the big level. I worry a little bit that we're getting a little lost in some of the theoretical, because it's very fun and easy to play around with theories, but I'd like to think about, and not just for our board, of course, because we're also thinking about other nonprofit boards, perhaps other organizations have less engaged boards, but what is the proper level for us to come in here, especially as we think about resources? Do we want to be approving every single little thing, where you're saying, hey, we're thinking about doing this book tour at a public library, what do you think? We're going to need this one resource, all the way to bigger endeavors. So what's the proper level where we can provide that oversight that's actually helpful and engages you, but doesn't wear you down, but also we don't get totally lost?
Yep.
That's a great question, and thank you, Alex, for segueing us to that place, because it leads us to the first question in our list. So I think we're all agreeing. There's no question in our minds that a priority is to get a plan in place for us. But in general terms, what do we want this board to have, or what does it need in order to succeed in offering oversight? And what I'm hearing us say is we need a plan, we need information, and we need questions on a regular basis. And I want to kind of draw us back to, on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis, what does that process look like of financial oversight? If the first step is a plan that actually identifies what it is we're aiming for.
What questions do we want the board to be asking?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the questions that we have already named is, do we have what we need to accomplish our mission? That's one question that could be in our regular. And you know, it's a funny thing about naming the questions, because we want to be, at least have the opportunity to be in the moment about the process that we're using. So it's a funny line between demarcating process and being open to what's happening at the time of being together, so that we can actually be responsive to one another rather than mechanical.
If this was any other board that was on, presumably the starting question would be, are we solvent? Are we still able to trade?
Right, which is that basic fiduciary question.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? In some of these discussions that we have, you almost sort of, it's a bit like Alex's point, you almost sort of move on from some of those very basic questions about, is the income coming in? Are we spending more than the income that's coming in? I've almost taken for granted that we might want to know those basic questions. So I think my two questions would be, one, are we solvent? And two, based on the forecasts, based on the most up-to-date knowledge that you have, are we sort of, are the forecasts that we have for the rest of the year, do they look okay, and do we need to take any action? And I ask those questions not in a sort of an oversight sense. I ask those questions in the sense that, I mean, the finances can be stressful at the best of times, and sometimes the best role of a group of people like us can be people who you might bounce ideas off in terms of, I mean, what fundraising might we need to do, or I mean, is there anything that you can think of that might help in terms of resources?
Your question, Carl, are our forecasts okay, and do we need to take action? I want to drill down a little bit on the do we need to take action. When the board asks, do we need to take action, who is the we the board is asking about, and what kinds of actions, which comes down to roles and functions, does the board want to be participating in taking?
So for an organisation of this size, I'm very taken by Justin's point that we are all the leadership and that we have a collective responsibility in terms of taking action. This is not oversight in terms of the board saying to you as the officers, if that's how we sort of describe you, you've got to do something. It's more about, okay, let's say that the flash classes aren't selling, and that you'd budgeted that we would sell a certain number of flash classes over the year. Taking action is that we would have a collective responsibility in terms of marketing those and trying to get more people to use them so that we get back on track. Another thing might be, in the past, you've asked us to personally support creating the future. Well, an action might be, I mean, the need to all join in terms of personally supporting again, or we might need to go and ask friends or colleagues to support. I mean, it's, again, I think the scale of this organisation is that I don't think there's a clear set of sort of things that we hand over to you or you do to us. I think it's all just, it's about taking action early. All the problems that I've seen on boards in terms of finances are when the officers go to the trustees and it's too late. it's 2 minutes to midnight, and you can't do anything. So for me, what the role of the board is here is you coming to us and saying, guys, we see a problem 3 months out, and we need to take action now so that the problem doesn't become a crisis.
Like an early warning system.
Yes.
I love the collective nature of what you're talking about, that all of us as the leadership team, I'm really loving that.
Yeah.
I would actually push to say, again, if we're modeling, that's the model for any board.
Yep.
Which is, if what we're talking about, because I'll tell you my experience, and I now have this actually in writing because of some community outreach that I did for one of the partners. Most organizations are asking for more leadership capacity. When you ask them what's going to make them successful, they say, I need more leadership capacity in my organization. And so what that tells me is they're sitting on a leadership body that's not exhibiting leadership. And so I think we have to actually frame it very clearly in that is the expected role of the board is to provide leadership. And leadership actually is not just setting the direction, it's actually figuring out how to navigate it. I think to Carl's point, which is, if we look at something and it looks like a course needs to be changed, and if we are going to walk the talk of creating the future, it is our obligation to reverse engineer what will make that change possible. We have to, as stewards of this organization and stewards of that framework, we have to engage in it, and we have to say, and we can't just pass it off and say, Hildy and Dimitri, go figure it out. Which, again, I know this is somewhat circular, but and I know I'm coming at this not quite the right way, so let me reframe it. In order to make it possible for us as board members to do that, we have to know what the plan was to get to where we thought we were going, know what the progress is we're making towards that, so that then we can adjust, because we're adjusting our thinking. We're not adjusting your thinking.
Thank you for saying that, Justin, because I wanted to, and I love how you keep thinking in terms of you are a facilitator's mind. What questions would lead the board to a dialogue on a regular basis about leveraging high levels of leadership capacity among each other, bringing out the best leadership capacity within each other? And so what you've just done is you've named two. What was the plan that we were working on? What progress has been made towards it? And where are the places where there needs to be more leadership? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I heard adjusting in there also. What's the plan? What's the progress? Where do we need to adjust?
Mm-hmm.
You said something almost in passing, Justin, that I really want to breathe in. We keep talking about the stewardship of the means, and you talked about stewardship of the framework. And the framework is really what we are about. It is a thought framework. It is the theory of change, hypothesis of change, whatever it is. Stewarding that is huge. And the rest of it is means towards that. And I'm really struck by what is the board's role in stewarding the ends, because financial oversight as a thing that we are fiduciarily responsible for, no board has any fiduciary obligation in any country around the world to accomplish what it set out to accomplish. So if we want to walk a talk of what it looks like to actually aim at ends, I would love to see a conversation about how do we steward ends, because that will lead to a conversation of how we steward means.
Beautifully said.
Wow.
One of the most interesting things that Justin said for me is about the need to be constantly adaptive in terms of your means, but possibly about the need to constantly adapt your ends as well. And I keep coming across stuff at the moment that says that the most successful organisations are the ones that have this sort of adaptive capability, that they're resilient in the way that they bend in the wind. Type stuff. And one of the other expressions that I keep hearing at the minute, coming back to this issue of a plan, is that we're living in a time where you measure the length of strategic plans not in years but in weeks or possibly months. And it's not plans that are useful, but it's planning that's useful. And this idea that you constantly change and adapt your plans as you go along. And for me, that's what the board is about. It's about, okay, we can write a plan at the beginning, but a board is about constantly forcing us all to look at that plan and asking, actually, are those goals still the right goals? Because the environment has changed. Do we need to change the goals? Do we need to change the means by which we reach the goals all the time? And coming back to the money, well, money's just a tool. So do we need to change the way that we use money to achieve those revised goals?
And when you look at it also in the context of a hypothesis is always being tested. That's part of what the laboratory part here is. And hypotheses are adjusted. You know, that, okay, if this is what my hypothesis is that if I do this, it will result in that. And if it doesn't, okay, what do I do? If it's that I'm aiming at, and that's really where I'm going, this is my hypothesis, well, then I need to make this adjustment, or I need to look at it a little bit differently. It doesn't change the overall, but it gives you the freedom where a theory is pretty solid. Well, this is our theory, this is what it is, and a hypothesis is more flexible. And I think addresses what you were talking about, Carl, in terms of the nimbleness of the thinking around the realities that we face.
And in a related issue, Dimitri, there's also a lot of interest in UK public policy at the moment about how we can shift away from piloting ideas or projects. So piloting is the idea that when you spend 6 months designing a service and then you see if it works, and if it doesn't, you start again, to instead prototyping services. So the idea of prototyping is that you make small sort of incremental changes all the time as you go along. So you can't necessarily evaluate that when you get to the end of it, but because you're prototyping and changing as you go along all the time, ultimately you come out with something that is responsive to user need. And it sounds to me that that's the sort of organization that we're in. So you almost go back to the beginning of the conversation and this thing that conferences don't work anymore. That's complete rubbish. Conferences do work. The problem is that people are designing conferences that conference goers don't want. If you prototype conferences and you keep changing them slightly and learning constantly as you go along, you get conferences that work.
I'm going to
rant over.
suggest that is directly anathema to the framework that we are all about. That is reacting to what exists now and making incremental change off of that, rather than aiming at what we want and reverse engineering the conditions it will take to get there. So you either aim at a conference that says, here's the outcomes we want, and we have to create the conditions towards that, or we react to conferences as they are and we make incremental changes off of that. Either way, the steps will be incremental, but the starting point being what do we have now versus the starting point of what do we want it to look like, I think changes the entire conversation.
Well, to me, I mean, I'm seeing a middle ground between Carl and Hildy. So, I mean, obviously, Carl, it's much out of the lean startup methodology, which I think there's a lot to. But I'm sort of seeing that the end is where we're going towards. So Hildy, as you said, focusing on the ends, but then maybe it's the means, which is where we have that validated learning from the lean startup, and that's the role that the board plays. So we think about these feedback loops where we're learning. Like, for instance, one of the things I'm really thinking about a lot is I don't want to get into the point where we're saying, okay, you need to have $1,000 for this, or you need to have 2 volunteers for this. But really what I want to know is, are we making the right progress towards this? And I'm going back to the term husbanding, right? It doesn't matter to me if it's resource X or resource Y or combination of resource X plus resource Y, but how we're building those towards the end. And so I think one thing the board could be doing then is building these feedback and learning mechanisms.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I really heard with what Carl was saying as you're prototyping the means. You're not prototyping the ends.
Yeah.
You're making the adjustments. You're acknowledging that, and I think this is exactly what I heard when Carl talked about a plan versus planning. Is, planning is the ability to continue to realign based on that goal that you want to achieve. And I don't think we're changing the ultimate goal, but we are acknowledging that the steps that we had along the way, or our concept of what would work or would not work, needs to have a flexibility to it, a humility to it that basically says, and if I'm hearing some of it too, is to say we might not, without having total leaps of faith, we might not fully know exactly what it looks like, but we're sort of starting the path, and we may have to make adjustments as we're going.
That was far more eloquent than I managed to get across in my sort of pidgin English. It comes back to money, doesn't it? Because surely then our responsibility as a board is not to say, right, this is the budget that we set at the beginning of the year. You said you would spend $1,000 on travel this year, and now you're telling me you want to spend $2,000. How dare you? It's about flexibility and prototyping that budget as you go through the year. But all the times, our role is also sort of standing back and saying, well, actually, we do have to make sure that we're still here next year, so we'll let you flex, but we're not going to let you break.
That makes clearer sense. Thank you.
I'm hearing a lot of thinking. Sorry, Dimitri.
So what I was going to say is thank you, Hilda, for being so cognizant of that difference and voicing it, because it is very easy to fall into the moving forward versus reverse engineering, and at times they sound like the same thing, and I think it's a really important distinction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, conscious of the time, we have 25 minutes left. I am not 100% sure that we have really nailed the board's role in all of this clearly, and so that we could describe to each other what's going to happen in our ongoing monthly conversations as we are being stewards of the ends. What I've heard us talking about, some of it is reflecting on the what's already happened, which is really important. We know that we have questions we want to know about the immediate operational side of things that will lead us to some thinking about sort of, more strategic and generative conversations. And I think I've even heard us, maybe I'm summarizing, I don't know, but I've also heard us asking questions or naming questions that might lead us to broader conversations. So one of the questions I've heard is, what are we learning as a reflective question? What are we learning as we hear about what has already happened? What does it mean? What do we need to adjust? And perhaps what options are available to us that we can look around at the resources and our networks and our abilities to identify and address, so that it's not the board handing it to the staff and saying, go fix this. It's the board actively engaged. The other question, though, that I want to ask is, to what extent are we going to have conversation with each other about where our individual capacity lies? To go back to the notion that what questions would lead the board to a dialogue about leveraging high levels of leadership capacity among themselves? Among ourselves, I should say. Did that make sense, what I'm asking? So there's the attention to the program, there's the attention to the staff, there's attention to the money. Where is the attention to the board itself and how we are with each other, how we work in between meetings? I think we can all clarify. One of the things in my notes that we talked about, Justin, that we talked about the other day was that there is so much more to what happens in between meetings than we typically think. And we were discussing that in the context of planning work or client work, but really there's so much that needs to happen in between meetings so that we can be prepared for the conversations that we have here, not to just be about what's already happened.
So I have two things. Before I think about that second question, and I apologize, I dropped a little bit there, Gail, but on the resource stewardship and husbandry side, I think we just have to have in our active inquiry, as we are talking about something, we have to have that space to say, what does this mean in terms of our resources? Just that simple question of saying, based on what we thought we would have, so some of that is going back to the plan that we have, and then some of it is, thinking about the adjustments. Again, going full circle to where I opened my comments, knowing that we have to ask that question as the next step when we're talking about, when we're evaluating how we're doing, or when we're thinking about something new. And I'm not sure if it's actually much more complicated than that.
I just want to share for purposes of I know what it looks like. I'm so stuck in my head right now, and so if I am like looking down and looking consternating, I know that sometimes that comes across as angry or unhappy, and I'm just so stuck in my head right now. This is there's something very big about what we're talking about that's bigger than what we're talking about, and so I just apologize because I know that it comes across as either rude or angry, and I'm feeling neither of those. What I'm feeling is just there's something really big that we're talking about here that we're not talking about, and I don't know what it is, but it's sort of like overwhelming at this point for me.
Oh, I think I know what it is. It's responsibility. It's responsibility and ownership, and this goes back to what Gail was saying. Of us as
the word ownership is coming to my mind a lot.
Yeah, we as board members, we need to understand. We need to ask questions, and we
as board members, and I'm really moving away from board members. Are we? I'd love us each to say, I am not a board member. I'm a leader of this organization. I think there is something huge in. I mean, so much of what we teach is the power of language, and I think that I am the leader. I am a leader at creating the future. I am Carl. I'm a leader at creating the future. I'm Alex. I'm a leader at creating the future is a very different construct than I'm a board member, because it doesn't have all of the bullshit of what a board member is that we carry with us and that we all have in our minds about what board membership has been for the past 30 years. And I am a leader of creating the future, and I have ownership in the accomplishment of our mission is a way different statement than I am a board member. I guess that's what I'm feeling, so thank you, Justin. I am really feeling the power of the statement, and what I'm picturing is the bylaws, because they just keep coming to me as this, as a document of who's running this thing and what is this thing, and I'm just feeling the power of this sentence. I am a leader at creating the future, and I have direct ownership in the success of the mission. And all that comes from that's why I'm feeling this is very powerful.
It's an aspirational word. I mean, when I think about it, I am a leader of this organization has an aspirational feel to it. I'm a board member. It's
disconnected.
Well, I was going to say I'm a warden, and it has that sort of connotation. I mean, to me, obviously experiences are different, but clearly I'm a leader of this organization also makes it much more harder to hand it off. You know, I'm a board member. Yeah, there's 72 board members on this organization. You know, where I'm a leader of this organization,
Yep.
you don't think of it in the context of a whole bunch of other leaders that they are doing something more or less or whatever. You just feel that, oh, you need to do your maximum.
And it comes down to the word that you said, Justin, is ownership. I'm a leader at creating the future, and I have ownership in the success of the mission.
Well, and don't forget the word responsibility. I think that
Ownership and responsibility,
yeah.
which go hand in hand.
So what is everybody else feeling about that, or how are you reflecting on what that means?
I'm very comfortable with that. My immediate reflection is that it makes us sound a bit more like a cooperative, like a mutual, what we would call a co-op or a mutual over here, rather than a more traditional voluntary organisation. But yeah, I'm very comfortable with that. The reality of an organisation of this size is that, I mean, anyone who thinks that as the board we can just sort of set the strategy and then tell someone else to go off and run it, I mean, it's wouldn't bear any resemblance to reality, would it? So maybe one of the big things that maybe comes out of these sorts of discussions is that you help set the agenda for what boards do at this level, and it's very much about mucking in and engaging and getting your hands dirty.
Well, I'll come at this from the other angle, someone who ran a board or tried running a board, and I think I didn't do it especially well. And I think one of the big things is that I never had that total buy-in, where I never felt like the people on the board, for the most part, felt like they were actually leaders of the organization, felt like they were more traditional board members, happy to answer a question here or there, but weren't actually having ownership in what we were doing. So thinking from the entrepreneur, from the leadership perspective, yeah, powerful language to change that. I can only think about how much better the board would have been had we had that board buy-in like that.
Wow. It's making me miss Alexandra and Sydney and Mark a whole lot.
Yeah. But I was really channeling Alexandra. I tell you what. I will tell you what. When I kept looking down at my sheet and my head was going like this, the words that I had written down, and I have Alexandra's name next to it, is why do we have a board?
Yep. She's asked that question many times.
Is if we're going to blow this up and start over again, then one of the things that happens, and I'm really riffing off of your Carl talking about an organization of this size. One of the things that we know happens as organizations go through life cycles is they tend to bureaucratize, and they start out with energy, and they tend to get into this is how we do things, there's something about blowing it up and starting over again and saying what do we really have the potential to be as humans leading organizations regardless of size, and what does that say for structure if form is going to follow function? I'm sorry, my brain just is yeah.
Well, and I think, Gail, going back to your question, we as this group of leaders, we have to be forthright and articulate about what responsibility, ownership, and leadership look like. And I know we're pulling some of that out, but I think to your question in terms of what the board has to do is what was popping into my head was, and as you were talking, Alex, is you often see boards looking for an answer. Like that's what happens when you start getting the bureaucracy. You're looking for the answer. Someone's supposed to bring you the answer. And we want to fundamentally shift that. Our role is actually to find the answer. And to ask the question. To ask the question first. And then that's the ownership. And then the responsibility is actually to find the answer.
Looking for the answer outside of us rather than looking for the answer inside of us.
You know, one of the things that I have been famous for saying, and then really making people mad and them thinking that I don't know what I'm talking about, is I'm not a big lover of policy, because I find that often policy ends up pushing us into these rule-bound places where we really have no flexibility. We can't honor the last question in the series, which is, what do we need to do to adjust? And how can we be flexible and nimble enough to meet opportunities where they arise? And that's pretty heretical in my experience, but I've worked in places where policy is not seen as the thing that we're striving for, but actually it's the thing that may guide us, but we don't really know that. Anyway, the point of that being, the degree to which we are able to, I'm going back in my notes to the moment when, Alex, you were talking about the role of narrative and how, in fact, every time an opportunity or a question arises, we engage each other in what's the background, what's the story, what do we know, and what do we really want as a result, and what does that mean then in terms of what we need to do. So I think we have the perfect process. We have everything we need to make things happen as a board and as an organization. And being forthright about what we're owning, as was just mentioned, is about the process. It's about the story. It's about the relationships. It's not about the rules.
Gail, would you share the story you shared on the Facebook group about the volunteer group that had the realization that maybe they were the problem?
Right. Yes. So the Volunteer Managers Network that I helped to coordinate on a monthly basis, we had a dialogue about negativity and what to do about volunteers who are frustrated, and especially when they're faced with rules and policy that, whereas they had been managing quite well as a team and as leaders in their community, suddenly they're faced with these rules that are meant to address one issue that pops up, one person's bad behavior, one situation of bad judgment, and suddenly there's this rule placed on everybody that doesn't allow them to be in their creative ability, greatness, or whatever, what they can contribute to the organization. And as the conversation flowed, the group started to recognize that, in fact, they themselves might be part of the problem that they're facing, that their rigidity, the rigidity of thinking that says we'll protect ourselves by having rules, and rules are the fastest way to get everybody in line, is actually creating the problem that they are trying to solve. And that aha moment for people in the group was one of those catalytic situations where they were saying to each other, well, then what does that mean that we need to do with and for each other as leaders? Because most of the time I don't even realize when I'm stepping into that place where I can become the problem. What kind of reflective opportunities do I need in order to recognize when I'm on the right, not the right path, but when I'm on a generative path and when I'm on a punitive path? And they came to the answer that it's together. It's with each other that they have that possibility.
So powerful.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Gail, the policy question, in my mind, so reflects around the agreement on values and the agreement on vision.
Yeah.
And that if those are in alignment or in agreement or understood and in agreement, then the policies are very flexible in terms of what they are the hypothesis, they are the micro adjustments, they are all the different ways we've been using to talk about it. But if those aren't in place and all you're relying on is policies, then yes, they are punitive, they are restrictive, they are whatever, because they're not part of the real narrative.
Gail, yet again you've sparked an idea in my head. I don't know if anybody can see this book. It's a book called Together, and it's written by a New York academic called Richard Sennett. and the subtitle is The Rituals, Pleasures, and Politics of Cooperation. And essentially what it's saying is that lots of organizations that we have, lots of systems, you have to learn how to work together. It's not just given to you on a plate at birth. It's not part of your DNA. And he uses the example of an orchestra, and about how learning to play together in an orchestra, learning how the players sort of bounce off each other, learning how you sort of sit together and all that sort of stuff, that you take those sorts of habits into other walks of life, and it's not about rules, as you've just said. I wonder if Richard Sennett might be of interest to all this board here in terms of thinking about how we work and what the alternatives are to rules, but also in terms of talking to organisations and saying, actually, you do need to structure how you work together. Maybe rules aren't always the best way. Sorry.
Thank you for sharing that, Carl.
Love that.
Just to share a piece of the conversation Gail and I were having on Friday, and I think it actually goes back to what we were talking about with our bylaws, because bylaws are the ultimate policy, the penultimate policy, that policies that prescribe action are not what we want. We want policies that encourage, policies are a condition of process, that they're defined in a way that encourages the process that we want to see take place, which is, again, particularly when we think about the risk mitigation, it's not that you want every rule in place that's going to try and eliminate a risk, because that's impossible. What you want is an approach that you want people thinking in a way that they're minimizing risk in how they behave, not did I do A, B, C, and D. Because now Z, new risk that wasn't on the list. But how do you get people to ask that question? How do I think about risk? And what do I need to do to try and mitigate that for me? And that's a very null hypothesis side of things. But to take that framework of saying a policy, be it our bylaws, a gift acceptance policy, HR, hiring practice, it should be structured in such a way that encourages process and engagement and thinking around an issue.
If I can fuse Justin and Carl then, and having fun with some analogies, maybe the analogy then is, rather than orchestra, a jazz band. So that we're basically putting in place the chord progressions, and then that lets us riff on top of it. And so the chord progressions, of course, being to make sure that we're, again, going towards the means, or maybe what the ends are that we want to go to, but then we're keeping flexible and hypothesis testing and validated learning along the way.
So is this swing or which?
We're going big band. Yeah.
A thought that's occurring to me as you guys are talking is a series of questions that for us to be addressing, and it is those 5 questions that you talked to, Justin. Those pieces of the organizational wellness planning piece, but it is what questions will we ask / what is the process we'll use for creating our goals? What questions will we ask / what process will we use for identifying what it will take to accomplish them? What questions will we use to minimize risk? What questions will we use to uncover what we need to know, etc. I think that it's reframing those questions rather than how will we minimize risk, to what process will we use, what questions will we ask to address all of those pieces. And that if we can answer all of those, we'll have our bylaws. Because bylaws are about establishing what our role is going to be in accomplishing the mission, what our role is going to be in essence, minimizing risk. That's the whole reason for the oversight. It's using an action of oversight rather than the goal, which is to minimize risk, or minimize undue risk at least. But I'm thinking that if we can identify what process we'll use and what questions we'll ask to determine all of those pieces, that's our bylaws.
And on that note, I wonder whether or
I
not
feel like
we
I need a
should.
cigarette. I gotta just say.
Oh my gosh. Now, Maria Turnbull is going to think that we are a bad group of people if we do that sort of thing online.
Oh, Maria knows it, or at least she knows it.
I presume she's still there. But you're making me blush. Look, you're making me blush. So it's 5 minutes to the, oh gosh, it's almost time. I think we really should start to wrap up and look back over this conversation, which has been absolutely remarkable. Our ability to go, off into the wild blue yonder, and yet still be cognizant of the fact that we need to have some kind of actionable process as a result of an amazing, amazing conversation. So as you look back in your notes, what's standing out for you as we wrap up?
I'll start. A whole bunch of stuff. A whole bunch of things. The hypothesis versus theory. I mean, to me, that's really, really, and I want the theme to all of these is the reframing of everything. So the hypothesis versus theory, the leaders versus board members, the policies versus flexible approaches, as in questions, and the last thing that you just said, Hildy, that those questions are the bylaws. I mean, that to me is like, whoa, and I'm still sort of trying to, sort of drink that in, because that is really amazing.
I have a very, very simple reflection, and that is that Justin, as always, pushes the boundaries of the boundary pusher. You did it again. You really did it again. I'm very grateful for that.
I'm gonna follow on that because part of this ties my awesome into my reflection. So much that came out of the conversation Gail and I had was about process, and not about. It was about the process of creating process. Is what this is about. That's what this work is about. It's creating the space for process in a structured way. It's not about a plan or a specific approach and so it's just I obviously flourish in an environment that's about process, but to see that framing of putting process first, that it's all about creating the process because that's where action really takes place. Action doesn't, it comes out of the thinking, the process, the space to do this. And where it pushes me, and this is actually where I'm accused of not going, is I now feel like, okay, now we've processed, we now know we need to write these questions, let's start writing those questions. We know the context, we know what they need to do, we had that breakthrough, now there's, whether it's an offline experience or something that particularly I'm feeling with the bylaws, there's a there that's actionable.
Yeah.
So many good conversations today, but for sure my biggest takeaway is just the realization that saying I'm a board member just really isn't sufficient, and I love things that I think are applicable to all boards, and to me there should never be a reason that someone just stops at I'm a board member, but I think from now on it should be I'm a leader of and have direct ownership in the mission. That's so powerful to me and so universally applicable and so important, so that's my takeaway.
My takeaway is that I've really missed these, and when you come back, you realise how much. I enjoy the sort of the intellectual sort of cut and thrust of them, but I'm yet again going to leave you with the takeaway that I just question: do you feel that you've left? Do you feel that we leave this having made enough progress? Because I worry sometimes that we all enjoy the intellectual sort of interchange, and is that at the expense of sort of moving this on so that we're not about creating the process, we're about creating the future?
Ooh. Well,
it is. I loved what you just said, Justin, because in answer to Carl's question, you talked about action coming from process, and I wrote down that process comes from our assumptions, and that the process will create the future. We're creating the process that will create the future. I'm changing your conjunctions, Carl. That we are creating the process that will create the future. I'm so grateful to you guys.
How about you, Rebecca?
That quietly and tried to make sense. We give you the real meaty ones, Rebecca, don't we?
I love it. I think just I'm a word person, so every single words mean things, and just even how we pause at every word, and because we are thinking of all of how we have taken that word member, which just means you belong to a group. There's no energy. And blowing up calling a board member right away, it's a sense of I am part of something, and it is my responsibility, and I'm going to steward, nurture, and love the shit out of it. It just that's so incredible. And just how everything trues back to the framework. Now maybe it's like flexing with some new lenses, but then when Hildy put it all back in, Justin talked about the questions, we talk about with organizational wellness, but then we just layer in a fundamental piece of the framework. It just becomes so powerful, and then go infuse it into the bylaw work or the work to be done. But it's not like a new little shiny object was birthed out of this meeting. It's all this rich narrative around the same awesome stuff.
I want bylaws that say, I commit to love the shit out of this.
You will have that. I know you will.
What'd you say?
So, if
What's yours,
if Maria's here, does she have a reflection? Do you see anything?
She was laughing when you said that Maria was going to be appalled at what I was talking about. She said that she is appalled, with a smiley, that she's still here, although she has been stepping in and out. Maria, any reflections that you have, please share them. And Gail, what do you got?
Well, here's mine. What I'm noticing about this conversation, and the only reason why I think I picked this up was because you printed this thing, the theory of change. You printed it on heavy cardstock, and I picked it up at the panel conference, and that's why I have spent some time really poring over it. But the inspiration to start this meeting by reading it, I think it's not an accident that we spent a whole lot of time blowing things up, having guided ourselves by saying assumptions must be built into our actions, and that we need to question what our assumptions are. So yeah, we've spent a whole lot of time doing that very thing, and that makes me feel really excited. Is it practical enough? I love that you dropped that bomb in the last 30 seconds, Carl Wilding. But here's the answer to the question. It depends on what we do in between our meetings, doesn't it? We've just set the wheels in motion for some action that we can take by summarizing. And I have to say, I have to make an admission to you. I've been coming to meetings for a long time, like a couple of years, and what happened for me at the end of the meeting was I thought, well, good work, good work you, nicely done, onward to the next thing, and I'd be back in 30 days. And now, having spent time in between meetings watching our conversation again, looking at Deb's summary, considering questions, thinking about what the content of this meeting was going to be, etc., so basically providing the next level of leadership, that we've just been talking about here today, what I'm aware of is that there's an opportunity for all of us to have that kind of engagement with what we're all doing and to carry the thread, to keep pulling the thread further and further. Like it came right out of the screen there. It's, keep pulling that thread so that 30 days from now we're picking up the conversation rather than starting all over again with something new. So we feel the continuity, we feel the level of continuing engagement that perhaps is what allows us to sometimes kind of, the thing falls off the end of our desk and we have to work hard to catch ourselves back up. So I'm kind of proposing that in the conversations I want to have with everybody individually as well as collectively, that we find the opportunity to look at what is it that we do in between meetings. What is it that we think about or commit ourselves to in between that time, the 30 days?
Gail, I'm just staring at this thing that I wrote on my page. If we are leaders at creating the future and have ownership and responsibility in the success of the mission, that's not every 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
This is really powerful.
And yet it's also said within the confines of what we've talked about capacity a lot today. So within the confines of what we actually individually have capacity to do or be. And, I'm walking away knowing that it's as much about the process as it is about the product.
Well, you're dead. You're dead right on with what Maria is saying. As always, amazed at the energy that creating the future generates and the engagement that results. You are creating the future, not just the process.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'm feeling that this question of the between time needs to be explored at our next board meeting with intentionality, because I feel like, just as Carl said, it's really nice to be in this space. They're incredibly generative conversations, but generative towards what? Besides our intellectual curiosity and sense of self something. I know that it's serving, but I would actually like us as a board to sit down and virtually talk about what we need that in-between space to look like, just to your point, Gail, of what do people feel like they can bring, what's it going to look like, how do we honor each other in the spaces of being able to bring what you can bring, so that we can start to feel like we're contributing in something that's a little bit more than just the intellectual around it.
Totally agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Maybe 2 cigarettes.
As long as you're not feeling dirty.
Yeah. Okay. So, folks, our next meeting is Monday, June the 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific, and our guest at our June meeting is a gentleman named Phil Cubetta, who, Hildy, I think I'll ask you to introduce him a little bit, since you've known him for so long.
Phil in most of his life, he has been a financial advisor, in many cases dealing with the philanthropic side of that, as well as just being a financial advisor. His initial love as a undergrad was in philosophy, and so comes back to a place of meeting the financial with the heart. He now runs the program at the American College for Financial Advisors, runs he has the philanthropic chair, and so teaches the philanthropy side of financial advising at the master's degree level, and is a brilliant thinker, a phenomenally witty and poetic and acerbic writer, blogs profoundly and prolifically, and will be a fun addition to the conversation.
Absolutely. We'll send a link to his blog just in case folks haven't seen it yet, called Gift Hub.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. And which is, it's a brain blower.
Yeah, because our brains aren't blown enough at these meetings. We're just going to be
That's right.
some more. So
That's exactly right.
you guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will
Lovely
see.
to see you all.
Yeah, you too.
You as well. We missed you, Carl. We missed you a lot.
Yeah, me too. It's been pretty hectic, but it's good to be back.
It's good to have you.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you, Rebecca,
See you
for
soon,
all your
folks.
efforts.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.